Gyro is a young, friendless boy who is upset because all his classmates think he's a weirdo. He is currently venting about his problems and receiving a pep talk, telling him to embrace what's unique about him. But the one giving him this pep talk is his dog, so I kinda see why his friends thought he was weird. It turns out that Gyro was born with the ability to hear the voices of all the animals around him, but talking to animals all the time freaks others out, so by the time Gyro was grown up, the only friends he had were the neighborhood animals, and he'd go to great lengths to keep them safe, even getting into fights to protect some of his animal buddies from the delinquents who were trying to mess with them. After chasing the delinquents off, the cat and crow thank Gyro for his help because those three have been terrorizing them a lot lately, but Gyro says it's no big deal and turns to head home. When he gets back, his grandpa immediately yells at him because he can tell that Gyro got into a fight again. He tells Gyro he didn't teach him the techniques of the shinobi just so he could go around beating people up in the neighborhood. He tells Gyro he's making a mockery of their family name, but Gyro says he couldn't care less about their stupid family name, and that sends his grandpa into a blind rage. So he takes out the family heirloom katana and starts chasing Gyro around. A little while later, the old man finally calms down, so he and Jiro are busy putting the doors back together, but Grandpa's got a community meeting to attend, so he tells Gyro he has to leave and that he will be back late, so he asks Gyro to lock up before going to bed. Gyro curses under his breath but agrees to his request. However, a moment later, that crow from earlier comes looking for Gyro and asks him for help because there's a cat in trouble in the woods. Gyro has no idea what's going on, but he follows the crow, and when he arrives at the location, he finds a cat severely injured under a tree. This is the first time either Gyro or the crow have seen this cat around here, and they have no idea what happened to it, but it looks like it's still breathing, so Gyro decides to do everything he can to save it. It turns out that before this point, the cat was a being known as Ragu, the devourer of the sun, and he had been summoned by a mysterious group who sought to use his power for themselves, but Ragu refused to take orders from them, so his summoners attempted to kill him for it. The next time Ragu opens his eyes, he finds himself in a warm cat bed back at Gyro's house, and a moment later, Gyro comes in to check on him. Gyro is glad to see that the cat is finally awake because, with how badly injured it was, he wasn't sure if it would pull through or not. He brought the cat a bowl of water, since he assumed it would probably be thirsty, and he then introduces himself, asking the cat to introduce itself as well. Ragu thinks Gyro must be an idiot because even if he did tell him his name, there's no way a human would be able to understand the words of a cat, but Gyro tells him it's not nice to call people idiots, for no reason. Finding out that Gyro can understand him comes as such a shock to Ragu that he runs under the bed and refuses to come out because he doesn't understand what's going on. Gyro can understand why Ragu would be startled if he has never spoken to a human before, but he assures him that he's not in any danger here. However, Ragu isn't so easily convinced. He doesn't sense any spiritual energy coming from Gyro, so he's sure Gyro really is a human, but just to be safe, he decides to stay hidden there until he can find an opening to escape. However, a moment later, Gyro comes out with some food, and all Ragu's earlier caution goes out the window because he's really hungry. Gyro finds it amusing how easy it was to get Ragu to cave, but Ragu shows no shame and says no hungry man would pass up a meal. Gyro also thinks it's funny that a cat is calling itself a man, but Ragu flares up and tells Gyro he is not a cat. He formally introduces himself as an immortal, or what is more commonly known here as a Mononoke. Mononoke often take the forms of humans or animals and blend into their surroundings without people finding out, and Gyro doesn't really get it, but if Mononoke are meant to be such powerful creatures, then he asks how Ragu ended up like this in the first place. Ragu explains that it was another Mononoke that did this to him, and when Gyro asks why it happened, Ragu says he isn't exactly sure of the details because he can't remember everything, but he recalls that it was another Mononoke that did this to him, and the reason they attacked was because they wanted his assistance with something, and he refused. Gyro is starting to understand what went down, because it sounds like after Ragu turned these guys down, they jumped him. Though Gyro doesn't really understand why Ragu turned them down in the first place, since he assumed that, as a Mononoke, he would want to help out one of his own. However, Ragu says he absolutely hates people like that guy because they are just parasites who want to act tough but can do nothing but rely on the power of others. Ragu doesn't really think there's a point in telling Gyro all of this, since as a human, he probably doesn't believe a word he just said, but Gyro reminds him that he's talking to a kid who has been able to speak to animals all his life, so immortal monsters existing isn't all too surprising to him. Meanwhile, out in the forest, a female agent has just come across the spot where Gyro first found Ragu, and she reports back to HQ that she found a pool of blood which she has confirmed belongs to Ragu, but she's not picking up any of his spiritual presence, so he must have gone into hiding nearby. Her boss tells her to wait for the rest of the search team to arrive for now, so she agrees to pull back and vanishes into the trees. It looks like there was someone else in the forest looking for traces of Ragu besides her. At the same time, back at Gyro's house, he is busy giving Ragu a bath to unwind, and he is impressed by how quickly Ragu's injuries have all healed because he looks almost as good as new now. Bathing Ragu like this reminds Gyro of how he used to do the same with his dog, Nachi, back in the day. She was the biggest, fluffiest a guy could ask for, and whenever he would get bullied or hurt, she would always ask him to give her a bath because she knew that always calmed him down. Later that night, Gyro goes to bed, but the second Ragu thinks he's asleep, he climbs out onto the windowsill and prepares to leave. He didn't want to have to leave like this since he owes Gyro big time for saving his life, but if he stays here any longer, then he's going to end up putting Gyro in danger. He then jumps out the window, but as he lands, he ends up wobbling a little because although his injuries may have healed, he hasn't regained his full strength yet. He is about to leave the compound, but all of a sudden, Gyro appears behind him and asks Ragu where he thinks he's going this late at night. Ragu is shocked because he could have sworn he saw Gyro sleeping upstairs, but Gyro had anticipated that Ragu might pull something like this, so he set up a dummy illusion in his bed to trick him. Cheap tricks aside, Ragu tells him he doesn't need to concern himself with his affairs anymore because he has already done more than enough, but Gyro refuses to accept that and reminds Ragu that he's the one who saved his life, so Ragu is his responsibility until he is fully recovered. Ragu tells Gyro that he never asked him for his help, and in fact, he would have been perfectly fine with dying out there if Gyro hadn't shown up. Gyro keeps arguing with him, but Ragu eventually loses patience and reminds Gyro that he is still a Mononoke, a human-eating monster, and it is in Gyro's best interest to just go back to bed and pretend they never met. But all of a sudden, a random guy walks into Gyro's compound and interrupts them. Gyro has no idea who this guy is, but he tells him to get out of here because he wasn't invited. However, the man calls Gyro an ignorant human and transforms his arm before charging at him. This catches Gyro off guard, so he isn't able to react in time, but Ragu refuses to let him die like that, so he jumps up and pushes Gyro out of the way before leading the guy out into the forest. He is doing his best to escape, but since he hasn't recovered his strength yet, the demon is easily able to catch up to Ragu and pummel him to the ground in no time. He tells Ragu that it's not too late to stop and agree to help his side because they put a lot of effort into breaking the seal that kept Ragu imprisoned, and they'd hate to have to kill him for not cooperating. But Ragu scoffs in his face and tells him that if he wants his power so bad, then he's going to have to risk his life to come get it. The demon then charges at Ragu with full force, but before he could hit him, Gyro comes out of nowhere with his family katana and slashes the demon across the arm. Ragu can't believe Gyro actually came back and calls him a fool for wasting the opportunity he bought him to escape. But Gyro says he couldn't just leave Ragu to die out here to that thing. And besides, if the demon actually did manage to kill Ragu, it probably would have come back for Gyro as well, so this was the best option he had. The demon fully transforms and prepares to attack Gyro, but he does find it rather surprising that Gyro isn't fazed at all by his monstrous appearance. He also notices the patterns on the katana and the stealth abilities Gyro showed earlier, and he surmises that Gyro must be one of the shinobi. The demon then charges at him and throws a punch, but although it was sure it had hit him, when it looks at its fist, all it sees is a piece of cloth because Gyro had actually dodged and was preparing to attack from above. However, while it is, because before he could hit it, it had already flash stepped behind him and stabbed Gyro through the back with its finger. Gyro attempted to get off one final attack on the demon, but it leapt back to dodge it, and it's impressed that he could even think of attacking with a wound like that, but it doesn't matter now because there's no way Gyro can survive something like that. Ragu walks up to Gyro and looks at his dying body with guilt because he knows this would never have happened to Gyro if it weren't for him. But when the demon sees Ragu looking at Gyro like that, he assumes he must be thinking about eating him since eating a human would help Ragu regain his full power. He agrees to let Ragu have Gyro's body in hopes that it will make him change his mind about offering his assistance, but Ragu intends to do no such thing. It's true that eating Gyro would allow him to regain his power, but he owes Gyro too much to do that to him or let him die here, so instead Ragu decides to let Gyro eat him. He then transforms and flies into Gyro's body, releasing a large amount of energy as Ragu's true power is finally released, and the demon can't believe that Ragu would actually betray Mononoke a kind like this and hand his power over to a human. Gyro regains consciousness as his wounds are healed with Ragu's power, but he has no idea what's going on, and he is startled by all the dark smoke coming out of his body. Just then, he hears Ragu's voice in his head, telling him to stop messing around and pay attention because they are still in the middle of a fight. The demon attacks Gyro again, but this time, Gyro's body is fast enough to dodge his attacks, and he manages to avoid being impaled a second time. However, he has no idea how to actually take the demon down. But that's where Ragu comes in. He tells Gyro that all he needs to do is make a fist, and he will handle the rest for him. Gyro doesn't really understand what that's supposed to mean, but he goes along with it, and as he throws a punch, Rigi uses his energy to blow a hole straight through the demon's torso, killing it in one hit. Jairu is still in disbelief about everything that just happened, but before he could even take a moment to think things through, he is suddenly surrounded by agents from the Espionage Bureau who came here in response to the spiritual disturbance, and he is knocked out so he can be taken in for questioning.